Gigith was hungry. This one thought filled her tiny Troggoth mind. Sitting in the stagnant muck at the bottom of her swamp, she could feel the need to eat spread throughout her body until every hulking, blubbery inch cried out to be fed. As she pondered this feeling, her mouth lolled open before snapping shut, reflexively checking to see if it already had food in its grasp. Bones crunched, hot viscera flowed. There was something in her jaws, something she had killed recently. Looking down to see what it was that she was eating, Gigith saw a thick muscular arm covered in runes extended from her mouth, the hand at the end of the arm still clutching a fire-steel hand-axe. She opened her jaws wide and swallowed the rest of the arm, as well as the axe, in a single gulp, and as she did so, small memories came flittering into her brain. She had been hungry. She had felt a rumbling through the swamp bottom. She swam up and saw grots battling red-haired Duradin. She started killing and eating, and when it was over, she swam back down to finish her meal. That's how she'd got this arm in her mouth. Not that it mattered much to Gigith. The meat and the metal slid down Gigith's gullet into her belly, where it mingled with the flesh of other creatures she had recently devoured. She worked her jaw up and down one more time, but there was no more food to be had in it, and she was still hungry. The desire for food grew louder, angrier. Feed! Feed! Then a voice came bubbling up through the hunger and into her head. A voice she had heard many times before. It was the voice of Gork, or maybe Mork, and it would always guide her to food. It always had done.
"There was a battle,"
said the voice.
"You're lots of dead to eat down here. You just gotta find 'em."
The voice was clever, and it had never let her down before. So Gigith started to crawl. Her filth-encrusted claws churned up clouds of mud as she made her way along the swamp bottom, the dim light filtering down through the water barely enough for her beady eyes to see in front of her. But as she moved, the scent of blood grew thicker and thicker. She was on the right trail. She would find food soon. Gigith reached out to pull herself forward, but instead of striking mud, her claw struck flesh. She opened her mouth and lunged through the billowing muck, expecting to engulf in her yawning maw whatever creature she had come across. But instead of finding a small morsel, Gigith's fangs sunk down into an enormous slab of meat. The Troggoth clamped her jaws down and yanked her head from side to side, tearing a chunk free from the thing. As she swallowed, the clouds of mud began to settle, and Gigith saw before her the corpse of an ale-guzzler Gargant, face down and half buried in the swamp floor. The Gargant had gaping wounds all over its body, some of which still had axes embedded in them, and the side of its head that Gigith could see was charred to the bone. Gigith's claw had fallen upon its ankle, and she had just bitten a chunk out of the dead behemoth's calf. The meat reached her stomach, so she opened up her jaws to rip off another big slice of muscle. As she sunk her teeth in for a second time, Gigith felt a mighty shudder running through the bedrock. Then a crack sounded in the depths, and swamp water began flowing past her with the force of a raging river. The Troggoth dug her feet into the putrid silt and braced against the buffeting current as the uprooted swamp weeds and pieces of rock slammed into her head. A mote of confusion. Why was the water moving? Her lower jaw fell slightly slack, and the Gargant leg tugged against her grip, pulled by the furious undertow. Gigith clamped down her jaws as hard as she could, finding the bone with her teeth and thrashing her claws against the Gargant's leg. She would not let her food get away, not while she was still hungry. The torrent continued, and soon the Gargant's body was pulled free from its muddy half-grave. It began to slide through the silt, dragging Gigith along with it. Her mouth was firmly around the leg bone now, and she pressed deep into the putrid muck with her feet and claws, but the current was too much. Through the churning waters, she could see a great gaping blackness ahead, a sinkhole of colossal proportions that was sucking in the swamp and everything it contained. The water level dropped below Gigith's head, and she heard the gleeful yelping of thousands of grots. Her beady eyes darted from side to side, squinting in the bright moonlight. She saw little greenskins riding makeshift rafts and fallen logs as they were pulled in by the whirlpool. They yelped with manic excitement even as their crude vessels plunged over the edge of the waterfall and into the darkness below. The Gargant's torso reached the edge of the chasm and dropped down into the hole. Giggith pulled back with all her might, her legs and teeth straining against the enormous weight of her meal. The water was down to her belly now, but still it flowed with unrelenting force. She could see larger creatures charging through the swamp, oryx, ogres and other gargants, bellowing as they ran with the current, heading straight for the chasm and diving in. The gargant continued to pull her closer and closer to the precipice, so close that she could see into the impossibly deep pit. The last of the swamp water drained into the hole, leaving Giggith at the chasm's edge with the gargant's leg still in her jaws. Her muscles were screaming, but so was her belly. Too heavy. Don't let go. Then she heard the voice again. It wasn't in her head this time. It was a real voice. She glanced sideways and saw a garrote next to her, a floppy fungoid cap perched on its head. "It's all right," he said. "There's lots of food down there if you don't mind eating dead stuff." It was the same voice Giggith had always heard, the voice of Mork, or maybe Gork. It was clever, and it had never let her down before. Giggith dug both claws into the gargant's leg, and let herself be dragged into the void.